The champagne glasses clinked around me as I stood frozen in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel. My father, dressed in his expensive navy suit, raised his glass higher. The retirement party buzzed with laughter and congratulations. Then he spoke the words that would shatter everything. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his voice booming across the room. "I've built Anderson Manufacturing from nothing, and my son Marcus has proven himself worthy of carrying that torch forward." He paused, and his eyes found mine across the crowd. "As for my daughter Victoria, well, she's the failure of the family. Some children just don't have what it takes." Laughter erupted. Not kind laughter, but the cruel kind that cuts through your chest like broken glass. My mother stood beside him, silent, her champagne glass steady in her hand. Marcus smirked from his position near the podium, clearly enjoying every second. I couldn't breathe. My feet felt glued to the marble floor as 200 people stared at me, some with pity, others with amusement. I turned and walked out without a word, my heels clicking against the floor like a countdown timer. "My name is Victoria Anderson. I'm 32 years old, from Portland, Oregon. If you want to hear more stories like this one, please subscribe to this channel. You won't regret it." I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The city lights blurred past my windows as tears finally came, hot and angry. When I reached my small apartment on 5th Street, I sat in the car for 20 minutes, unable to move. Inside, I stared at the walls covered with certificates and awards I'd earned over the years. Business degree with honors. Project management certifications. None of it mattered to him. I'd spent 15 years trying to prove myself, working in marketing, building campaigns, managing teams. But because I hadn't joined the family manufacturing business, because I'd chosen my own path, I was invisible. I poured myself tea and sat at my kitchen table, the silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. My phone buzzed with texts from relatives who'd witnessed my humiliation. I turned it off. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in. Then I saw it. An old folder on my bookshelf, tucked between accounting textbooks. Financial records from when I'd briefly consulted for Dad's company 5 years ago. I pulled it down, dust coating my fingers. Inside were notes, emails, budget reports. My hands stopped shaking as I started reading. Something wasn't right with the numbers. I spent the entire weekend buried in those documents, cross-referencing everything I could remember. Marcus had taken over operations 3 years ago, right after I'd left the consulting project. The numbers he'd been reporting to Dad didn't match the supplier invoices I'd filed away. There were inflated profit margins, phantom contracts, and cost overruns that had been cleverly hidden in quarterly reports. Marcus had been cooking the books, making himself look like a genius while covering up mistakes that should have cost him his position. Dad believed every word because Marcus told him what he wanted to hear. I pulled out my laptop and started a spreadsheet. Every discrepancy, every suspicious transaction, every timeline that didn't add up. The pattern became clearer with each entry. Marcus wasn't just exaggerating success. He was hiding failure after failure, and Dad was too proud to question his golden boy. My heart pounded as I realized what this meant. I had leverage. Real, undeniable proof that the family's success story was built on sand. But I couldn't just walk in and accuse him. I needed more evidence, more witnesses, more ammunition. I needed a plan that would be impossible to dismiss. Monday morning, I called James Walker, my former colleague from the consulting days. He'd stayed on at Anderson Manufacturing for another year before leaving for better opportunities. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, away from anywhere we might be recognized. "Victoria, I heard about the party," James said, stirring his coffee nervously. "I'm sorry. That was brutal." I waved it off. "I need information, James. You worked under Marcus. What really happened after I left?" He hesitated, looking around the cafe. Then he leaned forward. "It was a disaster. Marcus cut corners everywhere. He fired experienced workers and replaced them with cheaper labor. Quality dropped. We lost 3 major contracts because of late deliveries and defective products. Why didn't anyone tell Dad?" Marcus controlled all the reports. He blamed the workers, the economy, anything but his own decisions. Your father trusted him completely. James pulled out his phone and showed me photos of internal memos he'd saved. Warnings about quality issues that Marcus had ignored. Complaints from clients that were never forwarded to upper management. Budget shortfalls that were covered up with creative accounting. Why are you helping me? I asked. He smiled sadly. Because you deserved better. And because someone needs to stop him before he destroys everything your father actually built. I spent the next month quietly building my own foundation. Using money I'd saved from years of careful living, I registered a small consulting firm called Pinnacle Solutions. My specialty would be manufacturing efficiency and quality control, the exact areas where Marcus was failing. I reached out to former clients of Anderson Manufacturing, the ones who'd left after experiencing problems. I didn't reveal my connection to the company. I just listened as they told me stories of missed deadlines, poor communication, and substandard products. Each conversation added another piece to my growing file. Then something unexpected happened. Warren Tech Industries, one of Anderson's biggest former clients, contacted me directly. They'd heard through industry connections that I was offering consulting services. They wanted help reorganizing their supply chain. During our meeting, the CEO mentioned that they'd dropped Anderson Manufacturing 2 years ago. The new management just couldn't deliver like the old days, he said. Shame, really. The founder built something special, but his son ran it into the ground. I smiled professionally, taking notes. Would you be willing to document your experience? For industry research purposes? Absolutely, he replied. Someone should know what happened there. I left that meeting with a formal statement and documentary evidence. My plan was accelerating faster than I'd imagined. Thanksgiving arrived 3 months after the party. I wasn't invited to the family dinner, naturally. But my Aunt Patricia called me the night before, her voice carrying through the phone with forced cheerfulness. Victoria, honey, your father was just talking about you. He said it's probably for the best that you're focusing on your own little projects. He doesn't want you to feel pressured by Marcus's success. I closed my eyes, absorbing the condescension. What else did he say? Well, he's very proud of Marcus. The company hit record profits this quarter, according to the reports. Your brother is being considered for a Business Excellence Award from the Chamber of Commerce. Record profits. I almost laughed. I'd seen the real numbers through my network of former employees. Revenue was down 18%. They were burning through cash reserves to cover operating losses. Marcus was presenting a fantasy to Dad, and Dad was broadcasting it to everyone who would listen. That's wonderful for Marcus, I said evenly. I'm happy for him. After I hung up, I opened my laptop. I discovered something interesting in the county records office. Anderson Manufacturing had taken out a substantial loan 6 months ago, secured against the factory property. That wasn't the action of a thriving company. My brother was in deeper trouble than even I had suspected. Pinnacle Solutions began landing bigger contracts. I kept my profile low, using a business address instead of listing myself as owner. My team was small but skilled, people I'd worked with before who trusted my vision. We focused on doing excellent work, building a reputation one satisfied client at a time. Within 4 months, we'd helped 3 manufacturing companies streamline their operations and cut costs by an average of 22%. Word spread quickly in the industry. By the 6th month, we had more inquiries than we could handle. I hired carefully, bringing in experts who had worked in similar industries. Each success built our credibility. Each satisfied client became a reference for the next prospect. The money wasn't my primary goal, but watching my business grow gave me a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. One afternoon, my business phone rang. The caller introduced himself as Douglas Patterson from the Pacific Manufacturing Association. Miss Anderson, he said, your firm has been making quite an impression. We have a company in our network that desperately needs intervention. Would you be interested? Tell me more, I said, my pulse quickening. It's confidential right now, but it's a legacy business that's struggling under new management. The owner doesn't know how bad things are yet. We need an outside assessment. I smiled. I'm very interested. 2 weeks later, I sat in a conference room at Anderson Manufacturing. I'd been hired through the Pacific Manufacturing Association without Dad or Marcus knowing my identity. I'd sent my associate Timothy to the initial meetings, and now I was here for the final consultant review. Dad walked in, barely glancing at me. He'd aged since the retirement party, his hair grayer, his face more lined with stress. Marcus followed, confident and cocky, wearing an expensive watch I knew he couldn't actually afford. "Thank you for meeting with us, miss." Dad squinted at my business card. "Victoria Moore," I said, using my middle name. I'd changed my appearance subtly, different hairstyle, glasses, more formal clothing. "I'm here to conduct an operational assessment." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "We're doing fine. The association is just being overly cautious. Our numbers are strong." "Are they?" I asked calmly, opening my tablet. "Because according to your own supplier invoices, you're paying 30% more for materials than you were 3 years ago, but your pricing hasn't increased proportionally." Dad frowned. "Marcus handles those details." "Perhaps we should examine those details more closely," I suggested, sliding a printed report across the table. It showed just enough to raise questions without revealing everything I knew. As they studied it, I left one of my real business cards partially visible in my portfolio, with Victoria Anderson printed clearly. Not enough for them to notice now, but enough for later. Over the following weeks, small cracks appeared in Marcus's facade. Dad started asking questions that my report had prompted. Why were certain costs so high? Why had 3 major clients left? Why weren't the quarterly projections matching the actual results? Marcus scrambled to provide answers, but each explanation only raised more questions. I watched from a distance, monitoring through my contacts who still worked there. The employees had noticed the tension. Production supervisors were being questioned about efficiency numbers that had been inflated in Marcus's reports. Dad called an emergency board meeting with the company's small group of investors. Marcus presented his usual optimistic outlook, but this time Dad pushed back. He wanted independent verification. He wanted an audit. Marcus argued against it, claiming it would waste time and money. That resistance only made Dad more suspicious. For the first time in 3 years, my father was seeing through his son's performance. One of the board members suggested bringing back the consultants from the Pacific Manufacturing Association. "They seem to spot issues we'd missed," he said. Marcus's face went pale, but he couldn't object without looking guilty. My phone rang that evening. It was the association. "Miss Moore, they want you to conduct a full operational audit. Can you start next week?" "Absolutely," I replied, my heart racing. "I'll bring my full team." I spent the weekend assembling my evidence and witnesses. I called in every favor, every connection I'd built over the past 8 months. James Walker agreed to testify about the quality issues Marcus had covered up. 3 former clients provided written statements about broken contracts and failed deliveries. 2 current employees, protected by confidentiality agreements, shared internal documents that proved Marcus had been falsifying reports. My mentor from business school, Professor Helena Grant, reviewed everything. "This is thorough, Victoria. But are you sure you want to do this? Exposing family is complicated." "He publicly humiliated me," I said quietly. "He let Dad believe I was worthless while he destroyed everything Dad built. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it because someone has to stop him before there's nothing left to save." She nodded. "Then do it right. Document everything. Stay professional. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment." I spent Sunday night rehearsing my presentation. Every fact had to be airtight. Every claim had to be backed by evidence. I practiced staying calm, keeping my voice steady, presenting the information as a neutral consultant would. But inside, I felt the weight of years of dismissal, years of being invisible, years of watching Marcus get credit he didn't deserve. This wasn't just about business. This was about being seen. The audit week arrived. I walked into Anderson Manufacturing with my team, professional and focused. Marcus played the gracious host, showing us around, explaining processes, always staying close to control the narrative. During a company reception that week, I watched him from across the room. He was holding court with managers, telling stories about his business acumen, his innovative strategies. He mentioned me once, laughing about my sister who couldn't hack it in the real world. The managers laughed awkwardly. Some knew the truth. Some suspected. But none would contradict the boss's son. I smiled to myself, sipping sparkling water. I'd already secured the contract that his company had been pursuing with Meridian Industries. They'd chosen Pinnacle Solutions after hearing about our track record. Marcus didn't know yet that his biggest prospective client for the quarter had gone to his sister's firm. The financial audit was coming. His inflated numbers would be exposed by independent accountants within days. Every corner he'd cut, every problem he'd hidden, every lie he'd told Dad would surface. He raised his glass in a toast, confident and proud. I raised mine in return, knowing that his celebration was premature. The fall was coming.
He just couldn't see it yet.
3 days into the audit, I made my first official move. I submitted a preliminary report to the Pacific Manufacturing Association with copies to Anderson Manufacturing's board. The report detailed significant irregularities in financial reporting and operational discrepancies that require immediate investigation. I didn't name Marcus directly. I didn't have to. The numbers told the story. Phantom inventory that didn't exist. Revenue projections based on contracts that had been canceled months ago. Cost-saving measures that had actually increased long-term expenses through poor quality and customer attrition. I included an anonymous tip line for current employees to report concerns. Within 24 hours, 7 people called. Each one confirmed what I already knew. Marcus had created a culture of deception where bad news was buried and good news was invented. The board called an emergency meeting. Dad looked 10 years older as he read through the preliminary findings. Marcus tried to spin it, claiming the consultants were misinterpreting standard business practices. Then I sent the second document, detailed testimonies from former clients explaining exactly why they'd left Anderson Manufacturing. Missed deadlines, defective products, broken promises. Each statement included dates, order numbers, and communications that proved Marcus had known about the problems but never reported them. Dad's hand trembled as he read. "Is this true?" he asked Marcus, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stammered, searching for an explanation that wouldn't come. The next 48 hours were chaos. Dad hired an independent forensic accountant to review everything. Marcus tried to access company computers to delete files, but IT had already locked him out on the board's orders. His assistant, who'd been documenting his instructions for months, provided her own sworn statement. Dad called me. My real phone, not my business line. I almost didn't answer. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough. "I need you to come home. Something's happening with the company and I need someone I can trust." I closed my eyes. "Dad, I don't think." "Please," he interrupted. "Your brother is in trouble. The auditors are finding things I don't understand. You're good with numbers. You always were. I know I haven't. I know I said things. But right now, I need your help." He didn't know yet. Didn't know that I was the consultant who'd uncovered everything. Didn't know that I'd spent 8 months building this moment. "I'll be there tomorrow," I said. "But Dad, you need to prepare yourself. Whatever they've found, it's probably worse than you think." He exhaled shakily. "I'm beginning to realize that." That night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow I would walk into Anderson Manufacturing as myself, not as Victoria Moore. I would face them all. And I would finally show them exactly what the failure had accomplished. I arrived at the factory at 8 in the morning, parking in the visitor's lot. My hands shook slightly as I gathered my files. This was it, the moment everything would change. I walked through the main entrance, past the receptionist who'd seen me grow up, past the production floor where I'd spent summers during college. Dad's office door was open. He stood at the window, looking out at the factory floor he'd built 40 years ago. Marcus sat in a chair, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked like fear. "Victoria," Dad said, turning. "Thank you for coming." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Why is she here?" "She doesn't know anything about running a business." I set my briefcase on the conference table and looked at him directly. "Actually, Marcus, I know quite a lot. Probably more than you think." Before he could respond, the forensic accountant arrived with 2 members of the board. They brought boxes of evidence, printouts, spreadsheets, legal documents. The lead accountant, a stern woman named Patricia Cruz, began presenting her findings. As she talked, Marcus's face went from red to white. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified reports, misappropriated funds, contracts signed without authorization. The losses totaled nearly $2 million over 3 years. Dad listened in silence, his jaw clenched. When Patricia finished, he looked at Marcus. Is any of this wrong? Did she make mistakes? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no defense left. That's when I made my move. I can answer that, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. I opened my briefcase and pulled out my identification as Victoria Moore, principal consultant at Pinnacle Solutions, because I'm the one who uncovered most of this information. The room went silent. Dad stared at me, confusion crossing his face. Marcus's eyes widened with realization and fury. Marcus sputtered. You've been sabotaging me? No, I said calmly. I've been documenting what you did to this company. The sabotage was all yours. I handed Dad a second folder. These are statements from clients you lost. These are testimony from employees who watched you cut corners and hide problems. These are the real financial reports from the quarters where you claimed record profits. Dad opened the folder with trembling hands. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like grief. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Would you have believed me? I asked. Before now, would you have taken my word over Marcus's? He couldn't answer. We both knew the truth. Marcus stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. She's making this up because you called her a failure. This is revenge, nothing more. Then explain the bank statements, I said, sliding another document across the table. Explain why you took out personal loans using company assets as collateral without board approval. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The board meeting that followed was brutal. Patricia presented the complete audit findings, and I provided supporting documentation for every claim. Marcus tried to defend himself, blaming everyone from the economy to the workforce to me for supposedly poisoning everyone against him. But numbers don't lie. The evidence was undeniable. Under his leadership, Anderson Manufacturing had gone from profitable to barely surviving. The record profits he'd reported were accounting tricks, shifting expenses to future quarters, booking revenue from contracts that hadn't been finalized, inflating asset values to make the balance sheet look healthier. Dad sat through it all, his face gray. When the presentation ended, he asked everyone except me and Marcus to leave the room. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Dad spoke. How long have you known? Since the retirement party, I said. I found old files from when I consulted here 5 years ago. The discrepancies were obvious once I started looking. And you didn't tell me? You called me a failure in front of 200 people, Dad. You made it clear that my opinion didn't matter. So I decided to prove myself the only way you'd understand, with evidence you couldn't dismiss. He flinched. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly. This is insane. You're going to believe her over me? After everything I've done? What exactly have you done, Marcus? Dad asked, his voice deadly quiet. Besides nearly destroying everything I built. That evening, I sat in my apartment, emotionally exhausted.
My phone rang.
It was Mom. Victoria, she said, her voice thick with tears. I need to see you. Can I come over? She arrived 30 minutes later, looking smaller than I remembered. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where this had all begun 8 months ago when I'd found those old files. I should have said something, Mom said, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. At the party. When your father said those things. I should have defended you. Why didn't you? She closed her eyes. Because I've spent 35 years not making waves. Your father had such a vision for Marcus, such pride in having a son to carry on the business. I convinced myself that you were strong enough to find your own way, that you didn't need our validation the way Marcus did. I needed my parents to see me, I said quietly. That's all I ever wanted. I know. She reached across the table and took my hand. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You deserved better from both of us. She opened her purse and pulled out an envelope. These are documents from the early days of the company. Your father's original business plan, loan applications, partnership agreements. You'll need them. Why? Because Marcus isn't going to go quietly. He'll fight to keep control, claim you manipulated the evidence. These papers show the company's real foundation. They prove what your father actually built versus what Marcus claimed to have achieved. I took the envelope, tears burning my eyes. Thank you. The confrontation came 3 days later. Marcus had hired a lawyer and was demanding a formal board review, claiming the audit was biased and that I had conflicts of interest. The board agreed to one final meeting where both sides could present their case. I arrived early, my presentation loaded and ready. Marcus came in with his attorney, looking defiant. Dad sat at the head of the table, and for the first time I could remember, he looked uncertain. The attorney spoke first, arguing that my personal relationship with the family had compromised the audit's objectivity. He suggested that my findings were exaggerated or fabricated as revenge for past grievances. Then it was my turn. I stood up, connected my laptop to the projector, and began. These are bank statements from Anderson Manufacturing's primary accounts for the past 3 years. These are the statements Marcus provided to the board. Notice the discrepancies. I walked them through it methodically. Every inflated number, every hidden loss, every fabricated success. I showed emails Marcus had sent to suppliers, promising payments that never came. I showed contracts he'd signed with terms that were impossible to fulfill. I showed quality control reports he'd buried when they showed defective products. This isn't revenge, I said quietly. This is documentation. These are facts. Marcus didn't just lie to the board, he lied to clients, suppliers, and employees. And he did it while calling me a failure. The room was silent as I advanced to the next slide. Here's what Marcus's management cost his company: $2.3 million in direct losses. 4 major client relationships destroyed. 18 experienced employees who quit because they couldn't work under his leadership. And the company's reputation in the industry, which took my father 40 years to build, damaged beyond quick repair. I turned to face Marcus directly. You stood at that retirement party and accepted praise for success you didn't earn. You let our father believe you were brilliant while you were actually destroying his legacy. And you did it all while mocking me for choosing a different path. Marcus's attorney tried to interrupt, but Dad held up his hand. Let her finish. I've spent the last 8 months building my own company using the principles Dad taught me when I was young. Integrity.
Quality.
Treating people with respect. Pinnacle Solutions has helped 6 companies improve their operations. We've saved jobs and increased profitability. I did it without lying, without cutting corners, and without riding on anyone else's reputation. I pulled up my final slide, a comparison chart. On one side was Anderson Manufacturing's performance under Marcus. On the other was my company's growth and client satisfaction ratings. The question isn't whether I'm a failure, Dad. The question is whether you're ready to acknowledge the truth about both of your children. Dad stood up slowly, his hands pressed flat against the table. He looked at the projection screen, then at Marcus, then at me. His eyes were wet. I was wrong, he said, his voice breaking. I was wrong about everything. He turned to Marcus. I wanted so badly for you to be the next generation, to carry forward what I built. I gave you every advantage, every opportunity.
And you squandered it.
Worse, you lied to me repeatedly while destroying what took me a lifetime to create. Marcus's face flushed. Dad, I can fix this. Give me another chance. No, Dad said firmly. I've given you 3 years of chances.
It ends now.
He turned to me, and I saw something I'd never seen before: remorse. Victoria, I called you a failure because I was blind. I measured success by whether you followed my path instead of recognizing that you were building something of your own. I humiliated you publicly, and you responded by quietly becoming everything I claimed you weren't. A tear rolled down his cheek. You're not the failure. I am. I failed you as a father. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward. This is ridiculous. You're all believing her sob story instead of seeing what she is, a vindictive. Enough, Dad snapped. The audit is clear. The evidence is undeniable. Your employment with Anderson Manufacturing is terminated, effective immediately. After the board meeting ended, Mom appeared in the doorway. She'd been waiting outside, and from her expression, she'd heard everything. Stuart, she said to Dad, her voice steady despite her tears. I need to say something too. She walked to the center of the room, addressing everyone. I've been complicit in this. For years, I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I watched my daughter be diminished and dismissed, and I told myself it was better to keep peace than to fight for what was right. She turned to me. Victoria, you came to me several times over the years, hurt by how your father and brother treated you. And what did I do? I made excuses for them. I told you to be understanding, to be patient, to prove yourself in other ways. I chose their comfort over your dignity. Her voice cracked. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You deserved a mother who stood up for you, who told your father that success isn't measured by one narrow definition.
I'm sorry.
I'm so deeply sorry. She handed me another envelope. These are my shares in the company, 15%. They're yours now. Not as an apology, because I can't apologize enough for my silence, but as an acknowledgement that you've earned a voice in this family's legacy. I stared at the envelope, overwhelmed. Mom wasn't just apologizing. She was taking concrete action, giving me actual power in the company's future. Thank you, I whispered. 2 days later, I was at Pinnacle Solutions when my assistant buzzed me. Miss Anderson, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your brother. I hesitated, then nodded. Send him in. Marcus entered, looking nothing like the confident man from the retirement party. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face drawn. He stood awkwardly in my office doorway. What do you want, Marcus? I'm being sued, he said bluntly. 3 former clients are filing claims for breach of contract. The company's attorneys say I'm personally liable because I signed agreements without proper authorization. I know. I read the filings. His jaw clenched. You're destroying me. No, I said calmly. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it. I'm your brother. And you called me a failure. You let Dad humiliate me while you knew you were the one failing. You had every advantage, every opportunity, and you wasted them while mocking me for building something honest. He slumped into a chair. What do you want from me? An apology?
Fine. I'm sorry.
Is that enough? I studied him, this person I'd grown up with who'd become a stranger. It's not about what I want, Marcus. It's about consequences. You lied to clients. You put the company at risk. You treated people as disposable. So, what happens now? Now you face the results of your choices. The final board meeting was scheduled for Friday. I spent Wednesday and Thursday preparing my comprehensive report. Everything was documented. The complete timeline of Marcus's mismanagement, the financial impact, the recovery plan I developed, and my recommendation for the company's future leadership. Friday morning, I walked into Anderson Manufacturing's conference room for the last time as an outsider. The board was assembled, along with Dad, Mom, and the company's legal team. Marcus was noticeably absent. He'd been formally terminated and banned from company property pending the resolution of legal claims against him. I distributed bound copies of my report and began the presentation. For 90 minutes, I walked through every detail. The problems Marcus had created. The immediate steps needed to stabilize operations. The long-term strategy to rebuild client relationships and restore the company's reputation. Then I presented the most important slide. Anderson Manufacturing has 2 paths forward. Path 1. Sell the company to a larger corporation. Several have expressed interest. The sale would cover debts and provide Dad with a comfortable retirement, but the Anderson name would disappear from the industry. I paused, letting that sink in. Path 2. Restructure under new leadership with a focus on returning to the principles that made this company successful. Quality products. Fair treatment of employees. Honest dealing with clients. This path is harder, but preserves what Dad spent his life building. Dad leaned forward. Who would lead this restructuring? I would, I said. If the board agrees. I would come in as chief operating officer for 2 years to stabilize operations. After that, we reassess. The discussion that followed was intense. Some board members worried that I lacked experience running a manufacturing company. Others pointed out that I'd successfully built and managed my own firm. The financial advisor noted that my recovery plan was solid and achievable. Finally, Dad spoke. I have one question for Victoria. Why would you do this? After everything that's happened, why would you want to save this company? I looked at him directly. Because it's not about you or Marcus anymore. It's about the 68 people who work here. The families who depend on their paychecks. The legacy you built before Marcus nearly destroyed it. Someone has to fix this, and I'm the only one with the knowledge and objectivity to do it right. You could just walk away, one board member said. Start fresh with your own company. I could, I agreed. But that wouldn't prove anything except that I can run from problems. I'd rather prove that I can solve them. Dad stood up, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he walked around the table and extended his hand. Then let's fix this together. Not as father and daughter, as business partners. I shook his hand, feeling the calluses from 40 years of hard work. Partners, I agreed. The board voted. It was unanimous. I would take over operations immediately with full authority to make necessary changes. Dad would transition to an advisory role, available for guidance, but not involved in daily decisions. As everyone filed out, Dad touched my shoulder. Victoria, I know I can never truly make up for what I said at that party. No, I agreed. You can't, but you can do better going forward. He nodded. I will. I promise. 6 months later, I stood in the same ballroom at the Riverside Hotel. This time, the celebration was for Anderson Manufacturing's recovery. We'd regained 2 of the major clients we'd lost. Production quality was up 37%. Employee satisfaction had improved dramatically. The company was profitable again. Dad took the microphone, but instead of a long speech, he kept it brief. I've learned that success isn't about following someone else's path. It's about having the integrity to build something worth keeping. My daughter Victoria has shown me what real leadership looks like. She saved this company when it deserved to fail, and she did it with more grace than I ever showed her. He gestured for me to join him. As I stood beside him, he said, I once called her a failure in this very room. Tonight, I want everyone to know that she's the greatest success of my life, even if it took me too long to see it. The applause was genuine this time. As I looked out at the crowd, I saw moms smiling through tears. I saw employees who'd gotten their jobs back. I saw board members who'd bet on my vision. I saw proof that couldn't be denied. Not success handed to me, but success I'd built with my own hands, my own mind, my own determination. The girl who was called a failure had become the woman who proved them all wrong. And that was worth more than any inheritance or title could ever be. I'd won, not through revenge, but through resilience. And that made all the difference.